Hello and welcome to another episode of a podcast. This podcast is a continuation of a theme of the failed war on drugs and failed drug policy. Today I'm joined by Peter Krykant, who has a really fascinating story and opened the first unofficial harm reduction centre here in the UK. Peter, thanks for joining me tonight.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting me on, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here.
Peter, I was just saying before we started recording, I had to get you on based on your experience. I think your real world experience gives you real authority to speak on this topic, rather than a politician. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. So
Thanks.
The first question I've got is quite loaded. What is the sequence of events that led you to opening the first harm reduction centre?
So, I suppose there was, like you said, there was a little bit of a sequence of events. I got involved in working in the sort of drug, alcohol and other drug sector about 5 years ago now. Actually, 5 years ago, in January just gone. So when I first got involved, I didn't have any understanding or really know how difficult things were in Scotland, how bad things were in Scotland in terms of drug-related deaths, you know, and associated harms that go along with drug use under, you know, the banner of prohibition. I didn't understand any of that. You know, I had many years' experience working in sales and sales management prior to getting involved in this type of work. And when I got involved, obviously very quickly, you know, I got to understand how bad the problems were in Scotland and also the rest of the UK. And then the job that I was doing at the time when I decided to go and start the injection facility in Glasgow was an HIV street outreach coordinator in Glasgow. And at the time, Glasgow was going through the worst HIV outbreak that the UK had seen in the last 30 years, and that was condensed amongst people who are injecting drugs out in public places. And the role was really coordinating, going out and testing homeless injecting drug users for HIV. You can do that through rapid care, point of care tests. So you can actually test somebody and give them a result within 10 minutes. So we were doing that job, and that was the sort of stumbling point for me into, I need to do something here, because inside a safer injecting facility, you know, it's often talked about in terms of people not dying because, you know, you can reverse an overdose quite simply. But it's all the add-on things that go along with it, you know, that benefit not just people who are injecting drugs, but also society, you know. So if you're in an injection facility, you're going to be using clean equipment. It's going to be supervised by staff, so equipment's not going to be shared. Therefore, you're not going to catch or be prone to bloodborne virus transmissions like HIV or hepatitis C. So we were walking away from people most of the time giving a non-reactive result to these HIV tests. But I would know in my heart, you know, like people would be back at risk within an hour or two. You know, they'd be back in an abandoned building, in an alleyway, injecting drugs in really dangerous environments, dangerous conditions, prone to HIV, hepatitis C transmissions, but also potentially at risk of a fatal overdose as well. So yeah, that pushed me into it, and then I just decided, you know, I'm just going to go ahead and do this, and that's what I did.
Oh, fascinating. Was this all self-funded?
Well, I mean, it was publicly funded, and
Right.
you know, there's a story behind that as well, Sam. You know, I set up a Just Giving, or one of those types of pages where people can donate money, and I'm not sure which one it was from memory now, but the first one I set up was closed down, because I think the police seemingly contacted the the page, and the page was taken down, and everybody was refunded. And then I set up a second one through GoFundMe, which was never closed down. And that's how it was funded. So initially I bought an old transit van, which was £2,400. And then I took the seats out. It was a 16-seat minibus. I took most of the seats out. I left a couple of seats in. I got some tables in there, drove it into Glasgow, put some lights in the back, and let people come and inject drugs. And then, fortunately, the donations started coming in, and the van failed its MOT around. I'd had it for about 4 months, and it was during MOT, and it failed its MOT, and it was just too much to put it through an MOT. But by that point, we'd had enough donations to actually go and buy a decommissioned ambulance, which was, like from a visual viewpoint, it was like a real, sign of this being a health response to a health issue. And it was really fit for purpose. So the ambulance was amazing, and it's still touring the UK just now, with Transform Drug Policy Foundation and Anyone's Child.
Amazing. What was the initial reaction when this ambulance is driving around Glasgow, going down alleyways and allowing people to inject drugs? What was the reaction of people who actually take drugs?
Well, initially, I think the people who were injecting drugs in Glasgow city centre, where we were parking the van regularly, didn't really know what to make of it. We have this perception that people who use drugs don't know what's going on in the rest of the world or in society, where that's just not the case. I think most drug users and people who are injecting drugs publicly know that these types of facilities are available in other parts of the world. But I knew some of the people that were in the city centre already through my previous employment. Some of them knew my own personal backstory, that I'd spent time homeless myself and time injecting drugs myself. So the trust kind of built over a period of time. Initially, people came along, they were a little bit apprehensive, but after a few visits, they relaxed. And I suppose the turning point, when the service became really busy and really the ambulance wasn't fit for purpose, it's when the police tried to intervene, and allegedly I stopped the police getting in the van until the drugs had been consumed. And at that point, as soon as drugs are consumed, there is no illegal activity. Nobody's in possession of any substances. So after that happened, the word obviously spread, that it was a safe place, that I personally was going to stand up and try and protect these people against any, legal interventions from police.
So interesting. From your point of view, were you apprehensive when you first started going out? Because we're from the UK. This our whole policy towards drugs is to punish people and treat people as criminals, not to see them as human beings, not to see them as patients. And you went completely against that, and you bought this van, you crowdfunded this operation. Were you nervous? Were you apprehensive when you first started going out around Glasgow?
Yeah, no, obviously, it was a big news story. The BBC ran BBC, ITV. I travelled down to London prior to opening it and went on the Victoria Derbyshire show. So it was a big news story. I didn't have any sort of inclination the first time I drove the van into Glasgow what the police response would be. The police didn't give us any sort of specific, we will close you down or we will arrest you. They just rolled out the same old statement that they had been rolling out months prior to it actually opening, that injection facility or overdose prevention centre would break a range of laws under the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act. My whole goal within this was to go out and do it and prove that we weren't breaking any laws under the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act. And I firmly believe that that's the case, because had we been specifically breaking a law, I think the police would have intervened, and they didn't.
Right.
They allowed me to operate that service for 10 months without any interventions, so apart from this, attempt to search some homeless people that allegedly were in possession of some drugs, that's not, that's how the police used to react 20 years ago when they would set out outside pharmacies, when pharmacies first started distribution of injecting equipment. It's been recognised now for, at least the last 10 or 15 years that there's no point in the police doing that, because if they sit outside pharmacies, people will not go and get the equipment in the first place. The HIV outbreaks will continue, hepatitis C transmissions will continue. So they stopped doing it. So yeah, it was really nerve-wracking, and I didn't know what to expect, but I had some really prominent people stand up beside me and come out and stand with me on the van. There was a couple of people in particular who helped out all the time. They didn't want their names out in the public, but they were regular volunteers on the van all the time. And then there was some really prominent people like Paul Sweeney, who is a former Labour MP and a current Labour MSP in the Scottish Parliament. He came out and stood with me and stood beside me. Amar Anwar, the well-known human rights solicitor, Ronnie Cowan, the SNP MP, came out. Alison Thewlis, the SNP MP, various different Labour MPs and MSPs came out. So people came out and stood beside me and stood up, and we got some really not just local Scottish support but international support from like Helen Clark, the former Labour Prime Minister of New Zealand. So internationally, like Richard Branson from Virgin wrote an article on the service. So some great support, and eventually that led to the sort of infamous meeting with Nicola Sturgeon. After months of sort of the SNP Scottish government sort of refusing to engage with me, and the then public health minister not engaging with me in any way, shape or form. So obviously the meeting with Nicola Sturgeon really changed things from a political viewpoint, and took the campaign to the next level, where hopefully now we are on the verge of an official site in Scotland.
Oh, that's awesome. Did you ever get the impression whenever you had encounters with the police that they were kind of torn, because on one hand they could see the good that you were doing and that you were providing a safe environment, but on the other hand they're trying to do their job and abide by the law and apply the law? Did you ever see like that conflict?
Yeah, of course. That I seen that all the time. I would say 90%, 9 out of 10 police officers that I've engaged with specifically on this topic have been really supportive. There is always going to be, that a handful of police officers that firmly believe that the Misuse of Drugs Act, just like in society, there's still people that believe that prohibition and sending people to prison is the right thing to do, despite all the evidence that says it's not working, like we've got years and years in that, punishment and prohibition and sending people to prison is not going to help solve the issues that we've got, not just with people dying, but more generally in terms of spending billions of pounds a year, in this sort of narrative that of prohibiting drugs and trying to stop drug supply. So of course, there was that tone between having to do their jobs and obviously seeing that these facilities will help and support people. I mean, I, without a shadow of a doubt, know that some police officers that were out in the front line in the service were actually directing people to come to the service, rather than, you know, go to alleyways and stuff. And also some police officers picked up some discarded equipment and brought it to the van so that they could safely discard that in the sharps containers that we would have on the van. So yeah, I mean, the majority of the engagement was really positive with police. There was a handful of incidents that, you know, weren't positive, where, you know, obviously the one where they tried to search the homeless people that were in the van, and a couple of others where, you know, they've sort of seen people coming out the van and then searched them, where, you know, they've obviously known that those people have consumed the drugs already, but, you know, there was no need to do that. But yeah, I mean, that's the position really now that we're in, that the police still have to abide by the law, and the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act is still the law, despite, you know, it being over 50 years old and completely unfit for purpose.
Yeah, it's terrible. Now the root cause of that is, we just touched on, is whether people see people who take drugs as criminals who need to be punished, or whether they're human beings and perhaps they're suffering mental health issues and they need help. Well, why do you think people hold that narrative that they're criminals and they have to be punished and locked up?
Well, that's yeah, there's a lot to sort of digest in that question, because I think you really, the roots of this, you know, go way back to sort of 1971 and President Nixon and America's all-out offensive war on drugs.
Yeah.
You know, the infamous President Nixon statement about this all-out offensive. You know, and actually there's some information out there that says that, you know, they knew that you know, this was something that was never going to happen. They were never going to eradicate drugs or win this war that they were talking about in 1971. They were just creating a narrative, you know, really to oppress marginalized communities, you know, association of Black communities with cannabis, and later in the 1980s, crack cocaine, you know, and allowing the police to kind of come into those communities and, you know, through warrants and stop and search, being able to sort of break communities up and oppress those communities and send people to prison, and, you know, and really that's for me the roots of it. You know, and obviously in the UK we've went down that similar sort of path, you know, where I believe that the Misuse of Drugs Act has primarily been used to tease, you know, and you know, drugs in and of themselves are not you know, massively dangerous. It's the lack of sort of regulation and content control that really makes drugs very, very dangerous. But if, as a society, you know, we've been fed these messages from, you know, for over 50 years that drugs are bad, therefore people who take drugs are bad, it's going to take a long time for that message to be reversed. You know, it's been getting drip fed to us through news. It's been getting not just newspapers, but online news now, and earlier TV news, even through TV programs. You know, you look at some of the American TV programs of the 1980s, you know, like 90210, you know, somebody would take, you know, snort a line of cocaine and a week later, you know, and then you've got UK-based shows like Grange Hill, which really fed into the sort of Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan message in the 80s of just say no, because drugs are bad, so just say no. And that's kind of that narrative that's been, it's been thrown at us through media for years now. And I'm not saying that some people won't develop a substance problem, a problematic substance issue, and have problems with substances. It's exactly as they consume alcohol in a problematic way, and they need support and help to moderate or regulate their consumption, or potentially stop consuming altogether. But for those people who consume alcohol problematically, they've not got the danger of walking into an off license, buying a can of lager, and that one can of lager killing them. For everybody who consumes unregulated substances, they've got that danger of having no content control, no regulation, so you never know what's in it.
Yeah, my concern is this. I mentioned this to Ben in my previous podcast, is when I was about 13, 14 years old, I was at school, and I was in one of those RE religious ethics classes. And we're talking about drugs, and the teacher, she wanted to do a survey, and she asked, put your hands up if you think people who take drugs should receive rehabilitation. About 3 or 4 hands went up. The second question was, put your hands up if you think people who take drugs should go to prison. And 90% of the room lifted their hands up. And these were 13, 14-year-old kids. My concern is, if people have these points of views at such a young age, are they necessarily going to change over time? I feel like they're points of views that stick with you throughout your life, even if you are faced with evidence. People don't. I'm not sure if it's like an ego problem. People don't like to change their stance on certain issues. I think for me that's the biggest concern with the situation we set up with a war on drugs.
And you know what? Like, it's for that's why I think it's so important for people like me and other people who are campaigning for change and reform to continue to do media, to do these types of podcasts, to go on the TV, to comment in newspapers, and not just the Guardian or these sort of outlets where it's people who are maybe already changed, who have already changed their minds, or who have been brought up in a more liberal environment where they may have a different point of view, but to actually engage with some of the media outlets where maybe the people will not have been exposed to the ideas that could radically change to make it a healthier society for everybody. People put their hands up to say people who take drugs should get rehabilitation, and then the other 90% said that they should go to prison. I would say that those answers is wrong, because people who take drugs don't, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? It's like that's like saying people who consume alcohol, what do you think should happen with people who consume alcohol? And then people putting their hand, nobody would put their hands up and say they should be rehabilitated or they should go to prison, because it's just a normal part of society, isn't it? It's like, if you change that question and you say, what do you think should happen with people who consume drugs problematically, then they should be offered rehabilitation in whatever form that takes for them. Same with alcohol. But just because somebody takes drugs doesn't necessarily mean that they need any sort of rehabilitation or punishment.
Yeah, I agree. This another point that concerns me is just the other day I saw a post about on LinkedIn, this article about legalizing MDMA and regulating the market and actually producing it. And I wrote a little comment saying, I totally agree. People are going to take party drugs like MDMA, whether it's legal or illegal, period. And the point I was making was, I think it's a lot better if, university students are taking drugs that are produced in a safe pharmaceutical environment rather than drugs that are produced in someone's garage laced with God knows what. In America, there's this big problem with drugs being laced with fentanyl now, and that being fatal.
Yeah.
And immediately I had someone comment saying, what a stupid idea. You're only going to incentivize more people to take drugs. For me, I find that really difficult because, like I said, I feel like people are going to take drugs, whether they're abusing it or not abusing it, just taking it in a party, regardless of whether it's legal or illegal. And some people just can't seem to wrap their heads around that. And I think that's really damaging when we're having this conversation about how should we shape drug policy moving forwards.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I get that, and like I say, saying it's that old school attitude, that regulating drugs or changing the way that we deal with it is going to increase the amount of people that take it. I don't think that that's going to be the case if it's regulated in a correct way. When we talk about regulating drugs, certainly when I talk about regulating drugs, I'm not talking about going out, as we've done with nicotine and alcohol, and advertising it on football strips or Formula One cars. Like when I talk about regulating drugs like heroin as an example, I talk about rather than the people who are currently dependent on heroin getting that through a criminal supply chain, which is never going to be broken. That supply chain is never going to be broken. It doesn't matter how much money the police throw at it and how much resources they throw at it. They've been doing that for years. It's never going to be broken. So rather than continuing to do what we're doing and spending all this money chasing down criminal gangs, take the supply away from criminal gangs. People who are dependent on heroin, give them a safe, regulated supply. Imagine all the money that we save. I mean, billions of pounds we spend every year in the UK on these, trying to break down these county lines and these criminal gangs. That money could be used to offer people who do want rehabilitation, the rehabilitation that they need. In terms of things like MDMA, I mean, I don't know if you've heard of Professor David Nutt, but he used to be like the chair of the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs Act when Tony Blair was in charge and sort of New Labour. And he was famously sacked from that position for saying that horse riding was more dangerous than ecstasy. But I mean, it sounds funny, but it is funny because that's the reality of it, because it is. And that's in an unregulated market that horse riding is more dangerous than taking ecstasy in terms of the amount of people that get seriously injured or die through horse riding. Can you imagine how little danger there would be to consuming a drug like MDMA or ecstasy if it was actually properly regulated? Because 99.9% of the danger of that drug right now is that the content, we don't know the content, people don't know the content when they're taking it, and those are the types of drugs that like those drugs that are not associated with high levels of dependency, that could be regulated really easily, and supplied really easily through a regulated system. And as I say, even the drugs that are associated with high levels of dependency and currently associated with, high levels of deaths and harms, if they were regulated, for me, I 100% think that the deaths and harms would decrease. And if we regulated it without the mistakes of past regulation of alcohol and nicotine, we wouldn't see this like sharp increase in people consuming
Mhm.
heroin. Like it wouldn't make any sense. That because people who are currently taking heroin and are dependent on it are getting it through a regulated medical supply. Why would that encourage anybody else to start taking heroin? It's not like, as I say, it's not like you're going to start seeing it advertised in between Britain's Got Talent on STV, ITV, and, like you do with currently still with alcohol.
Well, what do you think are the biggest barriers, what forms the biggest resistance to change on the government level? Because we have all this evidence coming out, especially in the last 5 to 10 years. Do you think it's financial reasons, political reasons? Do you think it's just they're simply misinformed? They don't care? In the face of so much evidence, why?
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult question because, all the evidence points towards, things like safer injecting facilities, overdose prevention sites, drug consumption rooms, whatever you want to call them. All the evidence points towards these sites are sites that not only save people's lives, but they also reduce the impact on society. Where they've been set up in numerous countries now, I think 16 countries now, from Harm Reduction International's recent report. 16 countries have got them. There's estimated to be on over 200 sites operating around the world now. And the sites where they've been established for long periods of time, they've seen reductions in discarded equipment, reductions in bloodborne virus transmissions, and reductions, in deaths. So they're keeping people alive. So that those reductions in bloodborne viruses, reductions in discarded equipment, reductions in soft tissue skin infections, those stop people going out to hospital, stop ambulance call-outs, stop councils having to go out and pick up discarded equipment. So all that saves money. And I think where we see regulation for types of substances like cannabis, obviously there's data out there to say that there's not an increase in consumption for younger people, and there's not generally a high increase in consumption for people in that 18 to 25 age range either. And because it's regulated in terms of strength, it's not associated with more psychosis or mental health issues. So, I think it's a difficult question because the governments and their advisors must be seeing this data. They must be looking at it. They must be seeing it. But there is so much money tied up in the current system, from the amount that police get given to sort of continue to try and disrupt the criminal supply chains, to the court system, to the prison system. I mean, the current UK government, the Tory government, are all for building more prisons. If you're going to build more prisons and if you're going to privatise prisons, you need people to send to them. Like, you can't create a big privatisation of the prison system and spend billions of pounds on prisons if there's nobody to send to them. And from the last time I looked into the statistics, around 1 in 4 people sit within the prison system for non-violent related drug offences. So that's a big proportion of the prison system if you've got big prisons to fill. And then obviously, like you mentioned, one of the narratives has got to be around the vote. We still, we still have a massive part of our society that are of that generation who were brought up in like myself, I was born in the 70s, brought up in the 80s, in 80s and 90s, where the narrative was just don't do it because it's bad, just say no. I remember the Grange Hill song. You're probably a bit young for it, Sam. But I remember it was all the rage when I was at school. In the 80s, like they'd done a little song and dance about just say no. So like, obviously people of my age, that sort of 30s and 40s and 50s and plus that, have lived with this narrative since 1971. So people still vote on those issues. People still go to the ballot box and vote for the party that says they're going to put more policing on the street, that they're going to put the drug suppliers in prison, and they're going to stop the drug supply, despite the fact that all the political parties have been saying that for decades and never been able to do it. People still vote on that issue. So I have hope, not a great deal, that the UK Labour Party just now will make some changes if they get into power, which it looks likely that they will after the debacle of recent years in terms of the current Tory government. But everything that comes out of the UK Labour front benches at the moment, from Keir Starmer and his front benchers, is all about being tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. And one of his front benchers recently said, Steve Reid MP recently said something along the lines of absolutely naming and shaming people who use drugs. And it's just not what I would expect from Labour. I was brought up in a mining community in Scotland where my father was a miner down the coal pits when the coal pits were closed in the early 80s, 1984, where on the front lines of the miner strikes, and Labour were the party that stood up for the working classes, and the people from deprived areas and poor communities. And the simple reality of it is that the majority of people that are dying from fatal overdose, which is actually preventable overdose, are coming from poor communities. In the last two years, the figures that have came out, the studies have shown in Scotland that people from poor communities, in the last figures, were 15 times more likely to die from a drug death, and the year before, 18 times more likely to die for a drug death. And the Labour that I was brought up with would be the Labour that would be standing up for these communities and saying, we need to make changes here because the people that are dying and the people that are affected by this are from working class, poorer communities. And that's a real shame. The party right now in the UK that has the best stance on drug policy is certainly the UK Green Party. I would say even better than the Scottish Green Party. The UK Green Party are quite clear on their stance. I don't really see any clarity from the Green Party. It's probably because they're a ministerial party now and they've joined forces with the SNP, and like all big political parties, they want to toe a party line and give a narrative out for votes in the future, whereas the UK Green Party are really clear on their stance. They want to regulate substances and take them away from the criminal gangs to make them safer in terms of the supply and distribution to people that are really dependent on them. So you can probably tell when I start talking about politics, I do get a little bit, it upsets me because I have friends, like in political parties, and friends and people that, I would call friends in all political parties, and it's frustrating because we need politicians to be really brave and really stand up. But everybody at the moment is sort of on a knife edge with it, with the state of play in terms of Scottish independence, and also the next general election coming up soon as well.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating because anytime there's a major failed policy, usually the public would respond by voting the government out and electing a new party in the next election. Now, our drug policy has been going on since the 1970s, ever since Nixon declared for war on drugs. It's been a failed policy for 50 years. We spent hundreds of billions of dollars. It's just gone down the drain. The criminal system is, the prison system is on its knees. There's so many areas where this policy has failed. Why is it not being picked up on? Why is it just being pushed under the rug and people aren't really bothering?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know why it doesn't get more traction, because there's a lot of people, like a lot of organizations and a lot of people now regularly campaigning and getting quite a lot of media attention in terms of asking for change and pushing for change, like organizations like Transformed, that I've previously mentioned, like Transformed Drug Policy Foundation, Anyone's Child, Drug Science, the Release Drugs, I'm actually a trustee on the board of Release Drugs, and my own organization that I work for, Cranstoun, like as a frontline service delivery organization, I feel really blessed to actually work for them, because for me, the first frontline service delivery organization that's came out and been really vocal about the Misuse of Drugs Act being unfit for purpose, and that we need radical changes to the way that we currently approach this issue and deal with this issue. And that for me, that was amazing, because that's really what we've needed for a while. I think for a long time, frontline service delivery, in terms of the organizations that are out there to support people who use drugs problematically, have really sat on their hands and not said anything about the policies being wrong, because everything's commissioned in terms of services. So you don't want, services in the past have not wanted to say too much, I believe, because they don't want to put their contracts at risk. They don't want to risk their contracts and obviously losing contracts, etc. So I'm really proud to work for Cranstoun as an organisation, because we've done that, and I think we've led the way. And I think now other organisations are starting to also do that. I've seen other organisations coming out, like Turning Point Scotland, recently done a series of videos in terms of the Misuse of Drugs Act. And it's a different one, because obviously Scottish organisations are funded via the Scottish Government, and the Scottish Government do want to decriminalise anyway. But Misuse of Drugs Act's not devolved. So, but we also have to call out all levels of government, and although we've spoke a lot about the UK government, the Scottish Government have made some dramatic errors in judgment, with health being fully devolved, policing and crime being fully devolved, and the fact that, our drug death rates here in Scotland are 3.5 times higher than the rest of the UK with the same legislation in place. The reality is that the Scottish Government have made some really terrible, bad decisions dating way back to 2010, 2011, where they completely cut off the supply for regulated prescription benzodiazepines, which turned that over to the criminal gangs. And then in 2016, they cut the alcohol and drug partnership budget by over £15 million, which led to the highest proportional increase in drug-related deaths in a single calendar year in 2018. They rose by 27% in a single year. So some terrible, terrible decisions have been made in Scotland, and that falls into this narrative again that's the solution to people dying from drug deaths, and the solution to drug-related harms is this utopian society where everybody's going to stop taking drugs, and people that are currently taking drugs are all going to stop. We send them all to rehab or recovery communities and mingle with other people who are abstinent, and all of a sudden everybody's going to be drug-free, and we're all going to live in this drug-free utopia. And that's just not the reality of it. For some people, abstinence will be a route that they'll want to explore, and it will be beneficial for them, and their lives will be transformed through it. For the majority of people, what they'll probably want is to continue to take drugs, and they should be able to do so in as safe a way as they can, safe spaces where they can consume in safe spaces, and obviously get the support that they need in order to manage their drug use as best they can.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, what do you think caused that spike in overdose deaths in Scotland? I think you just pretty much answered it. Peter, what was your reason for running for office?
So, I thought at that point, I had quite a big profile. I think ultimately, going out and running a safer injecting facility gave me quite a high profile. And I thought running for political office, I could really sort of highlight the need for drug policy reform. I had no, inclination, like ideas that I could actually win as an independent. But I thought as an independent, running as an independent, I could run on, that issue primarily of drug policy reform, and the fact that, so many people were dying in Scotland. It still is out of control. Would give me a bigger platform. That was the only main reason. I believe that the bigger the platform that we've got as individuals and as organisations, the more we can shout about this, the more that the newspapers and the TV and the more podcasts we do, the more we can get out there and we can talk and we continue to knock on the door for real policy reform, for real change that's going to actually save people's lives, benefit society as a whole, the better. And that was why I did it. I mean, the one thing I suppose that came out of running for that for me personally is I would never want to be a politician. Like you, especially for a political party. I mean,
yeah.
If I was ever going to get into sort of any political office, whether that be sort of local council or anything at all, it would need to be as an independent. I could not play the political game where, you're party a party and you're whipped to vote a specific way, and you can't vote any other way, even if you don't believe in it.
That's a whole different can of worms. It's almost against democracy, isn't it? You elect your MP, and then he can't vote in line with the constituency. He has to vote in line with a party. But that's a can of worms for another day.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's like I say. I mean, I've got some good friends who are politicians. That I've made over the last few years, who I speak to, regularly or message and stuff like that. And I take my hats off to them, how they can do it, how they can be in that sort of public facing role. I mean, I get a lot of abuse online, and obviously I've got a really large following on my Twitter account now through the work that I've done, and I get a lot of abuse. Like people, I've a lot of these like bot accounts and fake accounts, and people who don't attach their real names or a profile picture to their account. All that type of abuse. But I look at some of the abuse that politicians get, and it's just constant all the time. Like I find it really difficult, even with getting a small amount of abuse in comparison to what I see some of them getting to handle. And that's been, I suppose, the most difficult part about the whole experience the last few years. Is like it's really sort of you're still putting your head above the parapet, in terms of campaigning for drug policy reform. And that, like we've spoke about already, the narrative is that drugs are bad and people who use them are bad. So yeah.
Oh, Peter, thanks for joining me today. It's Friday evening, you got kids, so I really appreciate your time. I just want to say I really respect what you do. It's really honorable, and it's really important for me to speak to someone who's I guess got grassroots experience and has real life experience of the direct impacts of a failed war on drugs. So thank you, and keep pushing on with the work. The last thing I want to say is there any resources you wanted to point towards for any of the listeners?
Sorry, can you just repeat that, Sam? You just cut up a little bit there.
Are there any resources, any websites that would be useful for people to read up on and stay glued up with?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously my own organisation, Cranstoun website, there's some great information on there around harm reduction, in terms of naloxone and, current approaches, and then, the other organisations that I've previously mentioned, like Transform Drug Policy Foundation, Release Drugs and Drug Science. Those are the organisations that I normally would point people to for, a full range of resources and information that they would need. Release Drugs are great around drug laws if anybody needs any help or support through interactions with the law or police. Transform Drug Policy Foundation are great for information in terms of drug regulation and other examples from Portugal and Uruguay, where drugs have been either decriminalised or regulated, and how we could go about doing that in the UK successfully. And then Drug Science, their drug information pages, are the most in-depth that you'll find on the internet, I believe, in terms of drugs and how they impact you and the effects that you can get from different and individual drugs.
Fantastic. I'll leave a link down in the description box below. Well, thanks for joining me today, Peter, and it's been an honor. Thank you.